This conference will now be recorded.
So first of all, what is the Veeam User Group Switzerland? The Veeam User Group Switzerland is a community of Veeam users and not a group of vendors that present their marketing slide or something like that. It's really from the user to the user and not from the vendor to the user. We're gonna connect and learn from each other. But the language, as I already asked at the beginning, will be in German for future meetings because it should be in a local language, and I think we don't have a lot of users from French or Italian speaking or even the Romansh speaking part of Switzerland. And yeah, it's a great way to meet on site in the future, and also virtual meetings to learn and learn from each other. Yeah. To the rules from the VUGs, we all have the same rules. I let you read it. It's not really, we don't have a lot of rules, but it's really about end user involvement. It's about communication with each other, and it's about knowledge sharing. But the most important thing is the last sentence. It's not, as I already said, it's not a free for vendors, resellers, or consultants to promote their own business. It's more a knowledge sharing thing. So who is organizing it? First of all, myself. My name is Dario. Some of you maybe know me. I'm the VUG leader for Switzerland. I work as a team leader in the virtualization and storage domain for IT Point in Switzerland. I started for HPE as a Linux engineer about 14 years now ago. And now ongoing, I'm working with NetApp, VMware, and Veeam in the consulting part or for consulting and doing Linux engineering internally for a company. And I studied IT security, so I will in the future hopefully do a lot more stuff with security, especially in the architecture part. So my main topics are, as I already said, what I'm doing. Main topics are scripting, open source tools, and architecture. Security architecture is one big part of it. In my private time, I love doing squash, watching ice hockey, not doing it, but watching it. And next week will be the IAHF World Cup, so I'm gonna be there at Riga. Maybe some of you also, and for sure photography. Patrick, maybe you can say something about you, which is also, Patrick is also someone behind VUG, which helps me organize all the meetings and all the stuff.
Yes, my name is Patrick Bletcher. I'm working as a senior solution architect for the company called Soltec, which was just founded 1.5 years ago. I started actually my IT career some time ago with digital, then Compaq, and landed with HPE before I moved to some IT companies, worked in the channel for the last 14-15 years. My main topic is storage area networks, servers, virtualization, and of course also a backup, primarily with Veeam, and do also some data management stuff with Scality, Cumulo, and Cohesity. So the main topics are architecture, design, and engineering. And in private, I do quite some sport, gymnastics, and I love to bike. So, and back to Dario or to Steve.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Patrick. To the agenda, we also have a third person in the, let's call it organization committee, which is Björn. He has unforeseeable event, and that's why he cannot introduce himself. And also the third session, he cannot make it. First of all, yeah, the first session or the intro session I'm doing now for the moment. The first session will be done by Steve, which is about Veeam news and immutability features, especially in version 12. As a big thank you to Veeam for big thank you to Steve for also doing the second session, because we also have another presenter which cannot make it, which is Norbert, and also Steve will do the second session. And the third session, as I already mentioned, Björn cannot make it for today, so we have a replacement. I think Doron is already here. He will introduce himself before his presentation. It will be about the comparison between immutability on a hardened repo and object storage. And at the end, we will have a short discussion, maybe a longer discussion, and we will search for a next topic or for some topics for the next user group or for the next meeting. So with this, I'm giving to Steve, and he's gonna share his presentation.
Yes, hello everyone. Here we are. Can you see my screen now? Hello?
Yes.
Oh, good.
I can see it.
Perfect. Yeah, hello everyone. Just from my side, thanks for the invitation, Dario. I'm Steve, working for Veeam in the enterprise team here in Switzerland. And in the next few minutes, now it's a little bit more because Norbert couldn't join, I will talk about the news around Veeam, immutability features as well, and the Linux hardened repository. So let's go. First of all, what's new around Veeam? You probably already know our platform. A lot of things happened in the past few weeks or months. Not only Veeam backup and replication got the new version 12, we also have for the cloud hyperscalers, we have immutability there as well. We will not cover that today, but just to mention it, as well as for Veeam backup for Microsoft 365. Also here we have the possibility to store immutable on the backup copy currently. That's around immutability and security. Of course, also Veeam 1 got updated to version 12, means that there we also have some new alerts around immutability. Therefore, if you are interested, have a look into it or contact your Veeam peer. Let's go to Veeam backup and replication version 12. First of all, I will share some news around the latest release. We got a patch on April 14th. You can scan that code, or you can go on our knowledge base and search for 4420. As well as together with the latest patch, we do have now official support for vSphere 8.0 update 1. Also here we have a knowledge base article. Grab your phone and do a photo. When we talk about immutability, there is much more than just hardened Linux repository, which is quite famous right now. We started with object storage, but don't forget tape. Also here we have the possibility to do worm protection as well as take out the tapes from the library. Together with version 12, we also had now, or we introduced the HP Store Once as a part of this immutable family. Therefore, here as well, if you run backups or store backups on HP Store Once, there is a new functionality, easy to use, like we do it with object storage as well as for the Linux hardened repository. The platforms on the right-hand side, some ideas when it comes to hardware or object storage. It's a list. It's not finalized, I would say. We have a Veeam Ready program on our website where you can check which object storage, for example, have the immutability functionality that Veeam supports. Therefore, always have a look into that. And in general, when we talk about Veeam backup and replication version 12 and security, we did some improvements around this topic. So in general, what happened? Yes, first of all, we now have two-factor authentication for the management console. That means it's per user. You enable or disable that, not allowed for groups, as you can see on the screen. And the most important thing, I would say, it works offline. That means you need to be able to type in the code that's visible in your application. And it's always a good idea to have a service account ready. Why? Sometimes you might need to synchronize your device with the Veeam backup and replication server. And it's also best practice nowadays to keep the management server out of a domain or in a separate management domain, as well as protect this Windows operating system with multi-factor authentication on top of our console protection. What we also do have, and you can gain a lot of new friends when you enable auto log off. Default is 10 minutes, but please go down to 1 minute. And I'm sure you will have a lot of new friends in the backup team. No, it was a requirement from our customers to have this option. And I would say 10 minutes is quite a good default, but as you can see, you can adjust it. A hidden gem, in my opinion, is when you do file level recovery on Windows systems. Here you see on top of the print screen, we now have the possibility to compare the restore point you present in the Explorer together with the production. So we connect to the production system, then you can also click on show changes only. And the good thing here is afterwards you can select, for example, here we selected the folder Word. You can do a right click and say restore only the change objects, and we will take care of that. You can decide if you want to overwrite the data or store a copy of the data. So you choose, and soon, please have an eye into the community. I will provide a script giving you the functionality as well from the command line perspective. Here UI, I would say it's quite easy to use, but maybe you want to check in the background and then PowerShell can be handy. Another good feature is the integration of the group managed service account functionality. Here we don't store the passwords for the application aware processing anymore in our management system. Here the question often arises from the customer is, hey, now my management server is not in the domain anymore. Do I need to rejoin it into Active Directory because it's an Active Directory feature? No, you don't, because we can have a guest interaction proxy doing the communication with the application at the end, and this guest interaction proxy or proxies then need to be in the domain. Your backup server, your management server can still be outside of the production domain in this example here, or in a work group. So depending on your requirements, your setup, you're fine to go with a guest interaction proxy. What you see here, the credential, it looks the same as before. The icon is a little bit different. And as mentioned, you just need to type the domain name / username. That's it. News around Linux hardened repository. We will do a deep dive afterwards. Norbert prepared some slides for that as well, a live demo. How about Linux hardened repository? So the changes here, look at the left-hand side, is that we have now let's say a special item when you add direct attached storage repository, means you click on Linux hardened, and then you just can enter the number of days you want to make the backups immutable. So you cannot disable or enable it anymore like it was before. And then in the backup repositories overview, the type, you see it's hardened. So it's like a new type. Well, of course, we had that before with version 11, but we improved as well this functionality coming from the customer feedback. Talking about support of backup types, here also some changes. As you can see, well, virtual machine was already there, but there are some other new backup types that can be stored immutable in this hardened Linux repository. So the list's almost complete, but also here improvements will be done in the future. Another thing, I had a customer with many hardened Linux repositories, and then every update that came in, they need to enable or re-enable SSH and enter the credentials. That's not needed anymore. How do we do that? Well, as soon as we installed our daemons on the Linux system, here it's the Veeam deployer as well as the transport service in the back, and that's coming up on the Linux hardened repository. So that means in the future we talk with those daemons and then trigger them or instruct them to install the update within this system. So it's not necessary to type in any user password anymore. Communication-wise, everything is done by Veeam. Quite handy, I would say, when you have a lot of servers to manage. Of course, object storage is also a topic here. Why? Well, we introduced object lock some versions ago. It was version 10, yes. That means, well, additional to that, we had it in a scale-out backup repository with version 12. Now we do have the possibility to do a direct backup into object storage. That means, okay, new options available. For example, you have a backup of your endpoints and on-premise and you want to store it in an object storage. That's now possible. But of course, you can also do backup copy jobs out from a regular repository onto an object storage. Agents, if you have a small installed base of agents or VMs running in the cloud, our product, the appliance Veeam Backup for Azure, Veeam Backup for AWS could be an option. But when you only have 4 agents, why not using the Veeam Backup and replication capability of deploying an agent in the cloud? Also here we do have improvements. Therefore, those agents in the cloud typically would first, of course, store the backup in object storage. And what's also nice to know when talk about object storage, it's, well, can be security. Why? Because you need to update one of the gateway servers, patch it. And in the past, you could only configure one. And during the maintenance, you were not able to transfer data through this gateway server. You need to add another one manually. Now, as you can see on the print screen, you can add several gateway servers. For object storage, this can be running on Windows as well as on Linux. But also here, please check our help center to see what's compatible. But quite handy when you talk with object storage. Can also be on-premise, of course, not only in the cloud. And also here, some, let's say, an overview of the support, what's possible, what can be directly put on object storage from a backup type perspective. On the bottom, you see the limitations currently. What does restore from tape mean? So given the fact you do, for example, a backup on tape from object storage, that's possible, but then you need to restore the VM data. And in the past or today as well, what you can do is restore it onto a repository. And this repository has to be, let's say, a regular disk repository and not an object storage. That's a limitation currently, can be changed in the future. No details on that, but just to remind you that you need to keep some capacity for restore from tape when you use that functionality. What's supported from an immutability perspective? Also here, the list is quite long. Well, not that long on the screen, but as you can see, the most used backup types are on the list. Configuration backup missing, but still, I would say it's quite good what we support here. Here, the discussion is more performance-wise. Is it enough or not? Check it or read through the white papers that are coming up from the vendors. We also introduced a new API in relationship to the object storage systems, please look up for Smart Object Storage API. I can share the link afterwards in the chat if you are interested into that, how it works technically. And here we get almost the performance as you would see with regular objects, with regular storage, sorry. Also here, quite some changes with version 12. And from my side, or at least from my side, from my slides, that was it. I'm not sure, Dario, if there are any questions in the chat, or there's no question functionality in this.
Not yet.
Not yet, good. So I think everything is clear. I will cover some additional topics afterwards as well, while I'm showing you the Linux hardened repository. Let me switch the slide deck. No, I forgot something important for the guys here joining from Switzerland. Here, advertisement. It's time for it after 30 minutes, right? On June 15 in Zurich, we do have our Veeam on tour. You can scan the barcode on the right-hand corner, or if you want to type it in, please go onto this URL and register. It's an on-site event where we will present news around Veeam, and well, we can also join and meet together out also from the Veeam user group Switzerland, of course. Probably we will see us then again, and I hope everybody could take the picture. Otherwise, Dario will share it at the end of this session as well.
Yeah, I will show it again.
Yeah, thanks. Good. Next topic is Linux hardened repository. Those slide decks, as you can see, were prepared by Norbert, and I added some, let's say, links with some more information around the topics he wanted to talk about, but it's quite straightforward. I did similar presentations some months ago. The agenda he prepared is an intro. Then we will go through an Ubuntu installation, not live, but with print screens, and afterwards some details about the configuration, as well as adding the repository in Veeam. It's quite easy task, but I will show that live. Then some post tasks that need to be done, and some, let's say, discussion around access onto this hardened Linux repository. So general, the rule you learn at Veeam is 3-2-1. We added 1-0 at the end. What does it mean? So minimum one of your copy is offline, air-gapped, or immutable. So minimum one, and still 0 errors together with the verification capabilities we do have. That brings us to the 3-2-1-1-0. It's like when you build up a football team, 4-4-2, right? So here you have 3 defenders, 2 midfield, 1 attacker, and the immutable guy is probably the referee, right? So you can keep that like this in your brain. He also added this slide here regarding performance class. Why is that? Well, you see here different kind of storage type, and the Veeam hardened repository relies on a Linux server with attached disks, and those disks can be locally attached or as well coming from SAN. Performance-wise makes maybe sense, but if you want to keep everything within a box, then it's let's say a local installation with local attached disks, and can be quite performant. So there are some white papers around it with some vendors showing you the possible numbers, and that's why we can call it, it's a performance class. To get to that Linux hardened repository, some vendors offer you to already pre-install a Linux distribution of your choice. Ubuntu is an option. We see quite a lot of Ubuntu installation, but if it needs to be a, let's say, more official one like Red Hat or SUSE, we support that as well. But also here, always have a look into our help center to see latest and greatest version we support here. Ubuntu is also good for you when you want to, let's say, check it, do some testing, whatever, and then you grab here it's not on this screen, but I prefer to take the long-term support Ubuntu, which is version 22.04, download the ISO, and then start installing the server. This is the first screen you will see after you boot from the ISO image, and then you choose the language. So English typically is preferred here as well. This is the general language, not the keyboard language. And then in the next step, they ask you, and here you see it's version 23.04. For testing, that's fine. I'm even not sure if it's already supported. As mentioned, I wouldn't take it because it's not long-term support from Ubuntu side. But here you could update your image. Typically here you do continue without updating. We will do that afterwards. Here, important, especially when you type in a password, have the correct keyboard layout selected. You could also identify it. You see it here, identify keyboard, then you need to type in some letters and then it automatically detects what you have connected to your system. Then network, well, here we could go deeper, as you can see here on the screen, which is good. Static IP address, of course, use that. Here he deployed it in a VMware environment for testing, that's okay, but not for production. What's create bond? It's not James Bond for those who are not aware about Linux. It's bonding is putting together multiple network adapters into, let's say, a logical entity. For example, you can do active passive, so one waits that the other crashes, or depending on what you have available in your network, you can also do link aggregation. Depending on the vendor, the naming is different. That means you can put together all your links and push the traffic through those interfaces. For example, you have two 10 gig adapters. You could go up to 20 gigs doing this bonding, this link aggregation. But also here, discuss with your network guy what's available with your vendor and then create it within this step. Can also be adjusted afterwards. It's a little bit, well, when you know Linux, it's okay, but here I would say the wizard is quite handy to use for such bonding tasks. Proxy, what's that? Well, typically traffic passes directly to the internet when you do an update of your system. But if you have a HTTP proxy in your house and you need to reroute traffic through it, then add it in here. Typically not used for servers, but really depends on the customer requirements. Now the next important part is the local disk or you need minimum 2 disks. One is for the operating system and the other one is for the repository data, for the backup data. And here, what you can see, let me bring up my pen. No, it's not coming. Here it is. Device SD, SCSI device A. Here you can see it's only 16 gig. Might be a little bit low. Typically, I say today with Ubuntu, it's 80 gig. But also here, depending on the version you're using, please go with that default or minimum requirement for the operating system disk. Then keep these settings as shown on the screen. And on the next step, what you can see here is the second device, the SCSI device B. Here he selected the 100 gig device. Here you would choose a size of the requirements from the capacity to store the backup data. We will not format that one, just keep it. Click on done, and then Ubuntu takes care to, let's say, partition your SCSI device A the correct way. And here it's just the information. When you continue now, everything on this SCSI device A gets lost. By the way, let's go back. Let's say your hardened Linux repository crashed, so your operating system somehow is not working anymore, but you still have the SCSI device B, let's say, available. You have access to it. You can keep that. It's not a problem. You just reinstall the Ubuntu on or the Linux distribution of your choice on the SCSI device A, and then SCSI device B just needs to be added afterwards in the file system tab, as we will do afterwards here as well during a regular installation. So that's quite possible as long as you have this SCSI device B available, not destroyed, whatever, you're fine to go and reattach it to a Linux system. Next step, an important one, as you can see here, the username. So the name is your name. The server name is clear host name, but here username is Veeam. Keep that in your mind for later on. Veeam is then the user to, let's say, log on to the system, but it will not be the user that we will use to add it to Veeam as a repository. It's like a failback user. So it's probably a good idea at this point in time to store it or to have a good password, a strong password. But we will show some additional possibilities to protect up the access to the system. So you can, for example, do SSH without password because you disable that. Next step is, of course, for the installation, we do need OpenSSH or SSH access. Therefore, you need to enable that. The rest, don't install anything else on this system. So keep it default and click on done. And then it takes some time. You will see some lines, what's going on. Probably you can grab a coffee or tea or whatever. And then at the end of the reboot, you see a login screen. And then we are ready to go. And the first step here is to configure the time zone. So there is a command available through the DP package reconfigure and then tcit data. You see here this wizard, depends on the version you're running, the Linux distribution. Sometimes it's not that colorful. You just see text, but here we selected Europe Zurich, but depends on your time zone where you're sitting in. And then the next step is to install an NTP client to keep that time, let's say, synchronized. Is it necessary? Not definitely, but we wrote, or somebody from our team, Hannes Kasparek, wrote a blog post around that. Chrony, also there you will see what's inside this configuration file to have it protected as much as possible. So he will write about securing the hardened repository against some remote time attacks. Quite good to read, maybe Friday afternoon. And then time is good, everything is synchronized. Then we do an update of the Linux operating system. The first command update is checking if there is something new. Upgrade is the upgrade process. You can add a -y at the end, then it don't ask you, like here in the middle print screen, if you want to install that, because yes, you want. And then it's always good to have a reboot. Probably it needs also one. And then after the reboot, we will configure the disk where we will store the backup data. So there are some commands visible here. Here we list the block device. As you can see, second device was SCSI device B, 100 gig, fine. Next step is we will create a logical volume on this device. And there are some commands necessary to do that. Naming is open. So here we use Veeam LV, Veeam VG. That's fine if you want to keep it this way. If you have a naming convention, you can change that. Also here we take everything what's available. So means there is no, let's say, partitioning of this volume. Therefore, keep it full or attach everything. Then next, we have now this volume ready. We need to do a format, like format C drive on Windows. We will prepare it with file system XFS. Why is that? Not only for immutability, but also for our synthetic full backups. Fast clone is another word for it. What does it mean? We can store full backups quite efficient, means we don't store the same block twice. Therefore, here it's important to execute this command here. Let me bring up this command here as shown, also with the size of the blocks. And important is this reflink equal 1, because synthetic full backups is working together with the reflink functionality. Then XFS file system is given. That means now we need to add it to the file system tab. What does it mean? Well, after reboot, you want to have it mounted automatically. First of all, here this logical volume is shown on the device mapper, not something else. So you can directly, let's say, attach to that volume name, and we copy that. We open up the file system tab, -etc file system tab, and then you enter here the line with the mapper information blank, or this /Veeam. Where is my mouse? Here. /Veeam is the mount point. So here it would be directly on the root Veeam. In my example afterwards, you will see it will be in -mount /Veeam repo. Depends on your naming convention and so on, but you can mount it in root, and you store that information in this file system tab file, and after every reboot we will present it the same way, or not we, the Linux system. Good. Then some additional stuff needs to be done on the repo itself. First of all, we add a user, as mentioned, not the admin user we created before. Now we do a specific user for Veeam repo. We use those commands. We will add this user to the sudo group, means that this user can then leverage some more privileges on the Linux system. We will delete that afterwards, after the installation, because this Veeam repo should be a regular user, just bringing up the services that are necessary for the hardened repo, for the repository functionality. Shown, what does it mean? Well, here, let me bring back the mouse. Here we give to the Veeam repo user and to the Veeam repo group the necessary right to /Veeam. This is the mount point where we will have the repository. And then we only allow this access for the user. 7 means read, write, execute. So also here, if you're not familiar with Linux, just Google for that. It has a quite good explanation depending on the rights you're giving. 7 is the highest, read, write, execute, but could be 3. When you see somewhere 733, that could be something else. Just read, write, or just read, or just execute. Here, that's best practice how to secure this mount point or this directory on your hardened Linux repository. And then we're ready to go and add the repo onto the Veeam console. And this we will do live together. So Dario just gave me a okay that you have the Veeam.
Yes, it works. Yeah, you can see it.
Perfect, good, because it's some blurry sometimes here on my screen, maybe the connection. So hopefully everybody knows where to add repository. We are here in backup infrastructure in the console, backup repository, and then we click on add repository. Then we do have direct attached storage, and here you see, as mentioned, this new item for Linux hardened with version 12. We give it a name, let's keep that default, and then we add this new server. So let me. By the way, Norbert would have done everything live as well. Therefore, this is not something just for you from me. It's Norbert's idea. My idea is to choose the correct name. Now here, single use credential. So you remember the user we created was Veeam repo, and I have given a strong password, of course. We connect through the SSH port 22 here. Next. Then fingerprint. Are you trusting this system? Yes, I do. It's mine. And now you see we will install the installer daemon as well as the transport daemon. Okay, let's do that. And then when everything is done, it's quite quick, hopefully today as well. Maybe not. No, it's working. In the meantime, no chat messages, no, good. No questions, no. Yes, collecting some information. Perfect, finish. Now we have it here in the selection screen. Next is the path, and here we would select from our example before /Veeam. I don't have this on my system, therefore I go to mount Veeam repo. Fast cloning, it's recommended we keep it enabled, and here you would set the make it immutable for 7 days. That's, by the way, the minimum, but we can go higher. Let's keep it 7. Rest is depending on the environment, the capabilities of the system. Maybe Dario invites me once for a sizing session in one of his user group meetings. Might be also something handy for you guys. Next is the mount server. Here you see it's a different one. The mount server is the guy mounting backups presented to the hypervisor if you use some restore functionality from Veeam. This guy here still needs to be on Windows, by the way. We keep that default and then apply. And then we will add the repository. Let's see how quickly that goes, or if I can. I will not interrupt it because I wanted to show something else, but we are already here. Backup repository 1 with this nice key lock, and now you can use it in your backup jobs. That's it. But afterwards, we need to do some, let's say, hardening as well. I will come to that later on. I just wanted to show something additional related to, let's say, security. There is a new button in our management console, best practices analyzer, and this guy as well checks if I'm using hardened repos. What I don't do is MFA, as you see, and I disabled the firewall just to show you something. And this list might grow in the future, but also here something to make you maybe a little bit more comfortable, because you know, okay, there are immutable repositories available or used, and then you get this past mark. Good, back to the screen. So now we added the repo. Post tasks. So let's harden it a little bit more. Now we registered this repository. The communication is done between the components using certificates. Therefore, we also want to protect on the repo server these folders with the certificates in it, so nobody else can touch it except for our Veeam repo user. And then, because everything is done, we can now remove the Veeam repo user from the sudo group. Important, this user, you can now remove it. Afterwards, what you can do is you can deactivate SSH if you want. There are other options as well. I'll come to that, but quite simple. But before you do that, you can disable it. Make sure that you still have access afterwards using a hardware console or direct hardware access with monitor keyboard. Remember that admin user we used for the installation, this guy still has access, is in the sudo group, and pardon me, and probably direct hardware access is the way to go, because nobody can enter your data center except you. hardware remote console. Here, depending on the vendor, some vendors also offer MFA or 2FA as well for the access to the remote console. Why is that important? Somebody has access to your hardware remote console. Probably they can also configure the RAID controller underneath, and when you have local attached storage, they could erase your disks or your RAID configuration. So make sure you do hardening as well for those components. If you want to keep SSH running, Norbert put in some examples as well, but of course, please keep this password safe, stored somewhere for this user you used for the installation. By the way, for root, Ubuntu doesn't set the password for you. It's a secret. You could change the root password, but nobody should work with root on Linux system nowadays. That's why this admin or administrator or whatever username you used is important for the direct access. If something goes wrong and you need to re-enable SSH or reconfigure something else, or as well, keep this Linux system updated. Also, updates are necessary, of course. Therefore, we need a user with permissions to do those upgrades on the system. We can keep SSH running, the SSH daemon, and therefore we can harden that as well in the config file. What in the example here, let's bring back my nice pen, permit root login. So root is not allowed to access from remote. Then we can also prevent access using a public key. Good. Password authentication, we can disable that. So your password is okay, but we can just allow access through private keys. I will show that later on. Then you can also prevent specific, or you can allow just specific IP address or IP ranges to access your system and only allow specific users using SSH. And here you can see public key authentication, yes. When you have changed the configuration in this file, restart SSH, and then you can keep it running. It's more secure, I would say, then, and maybe more handy than just disable it and go every time into the data center when you need to do an update. Here we have some examples on how to generate private key, public key. There are tools available. One is the PuttyGain. Probably almost everybody knows this one. By the way, we also deliver Putty with Veeam backup and replication. It's in one of the folders on the installation folders. Also here, what's important is you need to copy this private key. And here he used RSA. Other options are available with Veeam. I also have a slide on that. Here you copy this data and store it in the home Veeam. That's the user you want to use for accessing the system. Hidden folder SSH authorized key. So you paste this text, and then together with this key file you save, you can then access the Linux repo. The key file, the private key file, you need to attach to your Putty session. That means, okay, you can do it a little bit more convenient for you to enter in an auto login name, and underneath connection in Putty SSH auth, you would here have the private key, add the private key where you store it in advance with the PuttyGain. And then open and you connect just with your key without typing a password. It's also possible to create those keys on a Linux or Unix system. This is the example for Unix or Linux. Just copy paste those commands and then you're fine to go. And as well, you can connect through SSH using this key. Therefore, you have this option-I to say which key you want to use and which user. Therefore, what you need to do is before, of course, also here copy this key you generated on the Unix system and paste it in the authorized key. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. But I think that's clear for everyone. I added this slide. It's about what keys do we support. It's much more than just RSA. We added some, let's say, stronger key possibilities. This barcode here will bring you to the Help Center. It's about supported key types, but you can also search through the Help Center with supported key types, and then you will see on Linux, for Linux components, what keys do we support. Other resources, I was talking about Ubuntu. Our architects did write a white paper for, let's say, quite also common used enterprise Linux. It's Red Hat. Also here, you can get or grab some ideas how we did the hardening, maybe with some Red Hat specific tools, but it's a good read as well. Friday afternoon, as mentioned, go for it and read it. It will be updated, of course, in the future. Therefore, it's always good to have a look into it on a regular basis. And then, well, that were Norbert's slides with my spices and my demo lab. I hope it's maybe now you feel more comfortable together with Linux. And let me check. No, nothing. Is everybody still here, or am I alone?
There are no questions for the moment. Yes.
That's good. That's good.
Do we have any questions? We still have 2 minutes until the next presentation. Do we have some questions here? We can also you can also ask Steve at the end. Maybe he will stay with us until the end. And
I will stay in here, but I will join as well another call. No problem.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve.
Pleasure, as always. Thanks for the invitation.
I now make Doron as the presenter, and Doron, you should now be able to share your presentation. Thank you as well for being here, for jumping in for another one, which you cannot make it. Oh, it works.
Hi, Dario. Doron speaking. Hi, I presented it. I think you should now see the screen.
Yes, we will see.
And therefore, I welcome you to my part of this short note presentation. As Dario already said, I was asked yesterday if I can here today present something about immutability, Linux hardened repository, and object storage. So I created a short presentation to show on a big picture the difference on Linux hardened repository and object storage for a real-life comparison. So maybe short about me. As I said, I'm Doron. I work as a solution architect at DEC. We are the first VUG Switzerland, and therefore we had many projects, let's say with object storage, with new technology from Veeam, even beta versions. And so I'm happy to show you today a bit more insights. My goal for today, or my 3 goals, are to give you a comparison of the 2 solutions and kind of what are the pros and cons, because there is never the solution. The question is more what use case and what business case do they serve, maybe even what size. And therefore I have in the end some slides from some customers. Frankly, I did not know that it is on YouTube, so there are many information canceled out. So if you have questions about it, I can maybe explain a bit more, but the slides are now just half of the slides that I prepared. So real-life considerations with a bit less of the information that were planned. The agenda, I will give you a short overview with some comparison. Let's say some key points that we have to discuss normally on such projects. I know that there are just a few key points that if we go in technical deep dive, let's say 2-3 hours, we could discuss over 50 points more. But I just took the most important one that I think in this project are the one that, where the decision for the decision maker to go for one solution or the other. The considerations: what did this customer, what was the consideration point? Why did the customer choose A or B or even both solutions? And some design overview from these customer cases that I have. Short disclaimer for people that already know me, you know that I'm a huge fan of object storage. I'm also a fan of the Linux repository, and not so a fan, let's say, tape as the first, or no, let's say the first copy or even second copy. This is why I like the immutability features that Veeam has. already had over some years for object storage, and with V12 let's say even deeper for even the first backup. That is why I will only tell about these two solutions. Somebody's not muted, please. I ask kindly to mute you because I have an echo on my system. Yeah, and one thing, if you have questions, if it's about the slide itself, what I'm presenting, please just ask. If it's a general question or some input about it, I kindly ask you to bring it in the end, because maybe it's already answered a bit later in the presentation. So Steve already gave a great overview, so I just will say a few things like, yeah, you can use standard hardware, whatever you have, as long as Linux run on it. You need some Linux distribution. Steve showed us with Ubuntu how you can do this. He also showed how the in-deck components are installed, and in the end, Veeam is responsible for the immutability and will give you the solution that you need in this context. Just a short overview because Steve already showed deep dive, so there is no need for this. But I still prepared the slides yesterday. Object storage. Unfortunately, here I cannot do a pull request kind of how many of you are already using object storage or did some tests on it. I assume that many of you already have some experience. So shortly, we have a defined API. Let's say the de facto standard at the moment is S3. So if you want to have on-prem storage, the chance is really high that you will use S3 compatible storage in this context. And if I'm talking here about object storage, it can be in cloud, it can be on-prem. This is the important part. It's not just in cloud. There are many solutions that you can have on-prem. So just to compare these two solutions, we have to compare this on-prem. Veeam uses this API, and in the end, the storage system is responsible for the immutability. So short overview about these solutions. And now is a bit the question, how do we compare them now in a fair way to make a decision? I know these slides are not beautiful kind of marketing that you can show. They are just from a solution architect or engineer for other engineers, sometimes even for a decision maker, just to show you what we have in mind. So let's say you need some components for the immutability. Who is responsible, or let's say who installs this part? As you saw on Steve's demo, in the end, it's the Linux administrator that prepares everything. Yeah, here's the same guy as the Veeam administrator, but still, it comes from the software. You have to install it actively, these components. If you buy a solution, let's say object storage solution for on-prem, you get everything from this provider. But if you have it now installed, who is responsible to provide you the patches for or updates for OS libraries, requirements you need to install? So in the end, it's the Linux administrator or the backup administrator that is responsible for this server. You have to make sure that it gets updated in kind of a way that you get the right updates, the right security level. And frankly, here are ways to automate it, but you have to do it. So this is a bit the point. On the other side, on the vendor, he's responsible and you depend on it that he brings out these updates like on the image that you need to install. And the impact on the update is also a bit, how can I update my Linux hardened repository without a security breach? As I said, one point is automation for, let's say, the libraries. If you install a full-blown Ubuntu, you will probably have many security updates that have nothing to do with Veeam itself, but you need to do it in a way that, let's say, you don't have to access it with SSH and put something in the console. There are many ways to achieve this, but you have to keep in mind that you have to do this. On the other hand, an object storage for the immutability and, let's say, keep the updates running. How does this vendor does this process to update it? And this is the big question that brings us to the design and consideration about security. And this is the main point when we have discussion with our customers on the first place. How do we make it secure? And what does security mean? So in this context, it means that if you use immutability, we want to protect the data against attacks like ransomware attacks or even some dedicated attacks that somebody is maybe for weeks in your network and tries to manipulate your data. So it's not just about a day or two or some automated system, it's for a long term. And then for Linux, or in this context, the hardened repository, you have to think a bit on a bigger scale. Steve pointed to a good blog post about how to harden it. And I'm not sure if it's this one, but I guess there is already written like you have to prepare something, no SSH access, firewall rules, maybe even a harder firewall. And there are many questions you can ask there. There are many designs that you can do. And in the end, you're responsible to do this. If you are the end customer, maybe it's your partner, but you have to hire this partner. On the other hand, if you buy some object storage system that brings you more or less everything, it's the vendor. But then you have to ask this question, how does he do it? Kind of, if you have admin access to maybe update the system, can this admin also reset the system or not? Or if you have buckets with immutability, normally the buckets can't be deleted and the system cannot be reset. So you see, it's always a trade-off. What kind of question can I ask and who is it answering? Because in the hardened repository, I know the questions and the answer because I have to provide it. On the other side, if I trust the vendor, I have to make sure that he really provides this kind of security. And in the end, it's all a question about how do we solve this problem or challenge. And the last 3 points, these are then more or less, let's say, for a higher level from a design. Let's say monitoring. I have here, no, I deleted it correctly, from a customer story. He implemented by himself the Linux hardened repository. And he did not monitor the disks. He had a RAID 6. So one disk fails, nobody noticed this. A second disk, a third, and you know probably where it's going. In the end, the whole RAID was away, not away, it was failed, and therefore the data is away. So you have to make sure how to monitor it. Hardware level, or even some customer use kind of a webcam to monitor it. There are many ways to do it. It depends also about your size that you have. Let's say if you have the data center next to you because it's just a small room, you can enter it maybe one time a day you go in. On big customer, on petabytes scale in data center, this is not possible. So this is what I'm meaning. You have to provide all these points. On the other hand, on object storage, you depend on the vendor's monitoring system. Probably he will provide something. And the big question is now, who is responsible that this immutability works? Here with Veeam, you get everything from one hand. It's Veeam that provides everything out of the box. But don't forget that you depend highly on the underlying Linux system, file system, and the security design. This is a bit the point. On the other hand, on the storage system, as I said, Veeam just gives the data and some API calls, and the vendor has to provide it. And here it's, let's say, some success stories, how it works perfectly. We know also some vendors that have a highly, let's say, the bad kind of story. 6 months, they had it was one vendor, it was in the media. Over 6 months, object lock didn't really work as it should. So you see it's a bit a trade-off. Who do you trust? Which vendor, and how do you do this? And I'm specifically not saying any names here, so please don't ask them. It's just to show you what you have to keep in mind. And the end, when we talk to the engineers, maybe then it's the solution architect there, the team leader, or even some higher level decision maker. It's kind of the specific points, but if you do Linux hardened repository, what do we buy? I mean, you have the full choice of hardware of the Linux distribution, of course, as long as it is supported by Veeam, but there are many that are supported. How much effort do you invest to harden it? Kind of, there is never 100% level of security. There is no 100% in IT, we all know that. But how near to this 99.x do we go? How much do we invest? How much do we invest in this? Same for performance. Let's face it, it's a simple calculation. How many disks? What can my RAID controller do? But still, you have to keep in mind, and even how to scale it, like scale up backup repository, putting in more disks. So you have to keep this question and plan before you go live, because if you are in the operational mode, and then you have to ask these questions about, let's say, a bit late. And the big question is now, who do I trust? Which distribution do I trust? Which libraries? Kind of not just the distribution itself, but who will provide security updates? There were many libraries that had issues in the last years. Some of them provided fast updates, some not. And the same goes for the vendor. If he uses the same libraries, it's exactly the same. But there, I don't have to ask kind of what hardware or what distribution in the first place. I have to ask which vendor. And now you see there are vendors that provide software solutions. There you depend a bit on the hardware from your partner, that he knows what hardware it works. There are appliances that brings hardware and software, but then you depend on both stacks. And the big question is also, what does certified mean? I mean, if you go to the Linux harden repository, you need Linux, and that's it more or less. Of course, you have some requirements like distribution and libraries, but that is it more or less. If you go to object storage, the Veeam ready certification means more or less, yes, object lock works, the APIs works, and the vendor did some testing. But what's the minimum scaling, or what's the maximum he can scale? What happens if you have 500 million of objects in a bucket? These kind of questions that we see that many vendors have problem on big scale, these are not answered. The most customers just talk about, yes, we know this vendor, we buy it because it's cheap, or we trust this vendor, but never about what does it really provide for this kind of solution. And this is why we wrote marketing paper versus real life. Here we not say much more. I already had last year in the Veeam Germany user group an hour about discussion or even presentation about this. If you are interested in it, you can take a deeper dive there. So if you have now this matrix or this table, these are questions. They are not really, let's say, the considerations. What did the customer choose and why? But this is the first start for a, let's say, for a deeper dive or a high-level question. So the decision makers then started to ask the question, do they have internal Linux know-how? I mean, if you have a company with 50 workers and you have 2 guys in IT and they have to keep running the whole company, maybe you have a lot of Windows systems, some appliances, do you really have the know-how to keep this up and running? Do you have the security know-how to keep this up and running and even design it correctly? If not, which partner will help you? Does this partner have the know-how? And the capable ops team is not only about just the know-how, it's also about the resources. So as I said, monitoring, how do you solve this problem? You can automate it in a way, then you have to invest, or other ways how to do this. And in the end, a thing that is always, let's say, the key point is also cost. How much data do you have to store, and what is your budget per year if you calculate this per terabyte? So kind of how much can this cost in the end? A thing that we always put in is the, as Steve also said, the 3-to-1 rule. Not just about one point that you have or one copy that you have immutable, but the question is this even enough today, or how many immutable backups do you want? Because maybe, and I will show later in a use case, if you already have the physical hardware and you run Windows and you have a copy to cloud and this copy is immutable, why not ask yourself, why not having other copy that's local, that's already immutable? So why not? This is always this really interesting discussion with the customer, because there are always chances how to get more than one copy immutable without having too much to invest in this context. So from my part, what I want to give as an input to think about are 4 or 5 key points. Let's say it's 4 and the 5th is more like a no-brainer. The first is think in layers. It's not about the solution. Is it Linux hardened repo against object storage against something else? Don't think about the competition. Think more about layers. Where do I put in what kind of security? As I said, if you already have a Windows server that's physical there as a repository server, why not go for a Linux hardened repository? Even if you can't achieve this kind of security level that you want to have with it, but it's my last sentence, better to have a hardened Linux repo than not having one. Kind of, even if your copy is in the cloud and it's immutable, why not having one that's maybe not so hardened, but still it's hardened Linux repo, so you have another stack or a higher layer of security or level, kind of this stack. And don't forget on the total cost of ownership calculation, that's the workforce also need to be accounted. So if you compare a Linux hardened repository to an object storage solution, especially on just a few terabytes, on the beginning it can be that it seems much higher because just there is a price tag. But then if you calculate how many hours you need in the beginning to design this, to implement this, the Linux hardened repo, and then how to maintain it, keep in mind that you need to invest something. And of course, the object storage is the same. You need to do something for it, like the updates. And only then you have a real-life comparison to compare kind of an apple versus another apple if you want to make a decision in this. And in the end, it's always a risk assessment. How much risk are you willing to take? So as I said, with these layers, if you have only object storage from the same vendor, it can be a risk. If you have only Linux hardened repository, it can be a risk. If you now start to think, as I said, not a competition, but how to use it as building blocks together to achieve a bigger solution, then you may see that both together are also available as a solution. Do you have any questions until here before I go to the real-life solutions? Because I heard that somebody is unmuted. Okay. I have, we have a small customer. Let's say it's about 10 terabytes plus minus, so it's nothing that needs much of a performance. He had a really small Windows server with some disks in it. Of course, with disk, it's much more than this 10 terabytes, but still disks in it. And he has now made the step to a hardened Linux repo. And it was a simple decision for him. He already had this solution, kind of the server, the hardware is already there. And from his point of view, if he was now just installing Linux, doing the, let's say, the typical step to harden it, takes maybe an hour, 2 hours in this context, just getting a kind of, the minimum of hardening that you can get. From a security perspective, the chance is now lower that, let's say, some standard ransomware attacks will also delete your backups compared to a Windows server that he access with his user. This was a bit the discussion with him, and this migration was not so a big deal, because what does a migration mean? He also used S3 storage from cloud, not from Amazon, but doesn't matter, in Switzerland, with immutability. So he already had a copy there. We could just reinstall on the server Linux, and it was, let's say, really fast migration. And with this, we have now a higher level of security in the point of view from this customer. We know that you can do much more here to harden it, but from an investment perspective, he's willingly to take this risk because it's fine with the cloud solution object storage in this context that he has. We have another SMB customer. This project, I have to be fair, it's not done yet because it will be done in 2 or 3 weeks, like another one that we have, but it's more about the decision behind it. With V12, you probably know, or it was already said, that you can do directly a backup to object storage. This customer needs now in some months new hardware because the hardware is end of life. So the idea is that we replace this with a single one-node object storage, let's say, appliance for his side, because software and hardware are provided. Starting point 50 terabytes. And he will also do the VBO Veeam backup for Microsoft 365 to object storage, and therefore he has now just one single storage on-prem object storage that he can use then for both solutions together. Of course, dedicated backups, immutability for the VMs, just standard packets for the object storage, for the M365 backups, but still from a point of view from the customer, there's a big value. And he did the calculation, even if he had at the moment just 20 terabytes of storage, for him, with all the workforce he would need, it costs less per terabyte per year, because he has about 10% or 20% of workforce that is working in IT for this small business. So this is a bit the idea behind. And also he is using object storage in the cloud to have another offsite backup, of course, with immutability. Then we have a medium customer frankly, I'm not going into detail because it's exactly the same solution. Here it was for 20 terabytes. Here it is for 100 terabytes that he has, just a bigger system that we are at the moment implementing. So we began this project maybe 2 weeks ago. And just to show from a small to a bigger customer, it was exactly the same decision points why they used this solution. And now I have a big customer. Let's say he has 3 data centers, 2 to 3 petabytes. He already has many physical repository servers. And at the moment, they are installed with Windows, ReFS. And yeah, he has a bit of problem how to solve this, how to solve the immutability. At the moment, there is a big tape library, and he has a lot of problems because of, let's say, RTO and other situation, because he has now to do backups more frequently. So the new design that he decided to go was he will reuse his physical hardware, his standard servers, and start with Linux harden repository and keep there maybe 14 days of backups. At the moment, it is the same. With Windows, it's 14 days and the rest to tape. But now, instead of tape, he will do the rest in a third data center, or the fourth in this case, sorry, and go directly to object storage with immutability. He will start with 1 point something peta for the first testing, for the first month, and later he can just scale out. And this is a bit to show you, and this is why I'm using it as the last example. As I said, it's not a competition, Linux hardened repository against object storage. For me, it's always, how do we use these two solutions? What's best for the customer? And here for this customer, he's a really big customer. He has hundreds of, or even thousands of people working for him, about 20 people in IT, so he can easily handle it, and also has the same ideas behind to say the hardened Linux repository need to be hardened to a point that it makes sense, and for the rest, he has object storage. So this is a bit to show you how different customers with different size have done it, and with all this questioning we did before, or these considerations, leaded to these decisions that this customer made in the end. From my point, this is it. Just to show you these goals, or let's say these considerations. And I hope that this gives some input for the future, what to ask or what to think about if you want to go for one or even both solutions. And of course, if you have questions, I'm happy to assist you. And even if it's later, because I know that this is on YouTube later, so maybe not all will ask, just write me an email. I'm always happy to have a conversation, discussion. And of course, I'm also always interested of hearing feedbacks, how you did it and why. If there are any questions.
Thank you, Doron. Are there any questions? So my key takeaway is, Doron, it's not always object storage versus hardened repo. It's also both, the best of both worlds. You can also use it like this.
Yes, correctly, because as you said, it's not a competition. It's more about how to use it together. If you can use it, of course, it's also a question about the size your customer has.
So do we have any questions here, or? So we're in the last part of today. Thank you very much, Doron, for your presentation. Once again, I want to remind you, Steve already mentioned it. Here's the QR code again. Scan it, register. There's also a session if we have any French speaking members. There's also a session in Lausanne. I think it's the 22nd of June. And yeah, register yourself. We will see you there. So we're going already to the last small topic. Do you have any questions or any open things you want to ask the people which are here, the presenters, maybe each other? The discussion is open for everyone. You can unmute yourself. You can ask questions. If not, there's a QR code which is about the next event. So there are 2 questions on Mentimeter. I'm very happy if you answer these two questions, that would be nice, so we can see what you want to do or see on the next virtual or on-site event. The QR code is on the left side of the screen. You should see it. I have to share it again, like this. So we have these two questions here, the QR code. The QR code is on the left side again. There's the first question is, what are you willing to do the next session on site? Maybe I will put the results, I will put in the forum. Register yourself on the forum as well. We can discuss the first and the second question, which is about which topic do you want to hear about, and we can discuss there. So we have already 4 people voting for. It's always remote on-site. It's always the big question. It doesn't have to be far away. Something somewhere in middle Switzerland. You can also reach me via email. Dario.Furigo@idpoint.ch. You can ask me questions. You can ask all the presenters questions here afterwards. You can reach out to us. Maybe you've got some good feedback, which we can also, which we're happy to fulfill. And I leave the Mentimeter for here for now. If you have any topics on the next one, you can add the topics here, and if not, the session is over. Thank you for your participation. Thank you to presenters for all your time and for the very cool presentations. And we already have a few topics. I will also share it to the forum afterwards. And thank you very much all, and have a nice evening.